So in this stream, what I would like to do is have a quick look at 2 Corinthians 10 and 11. I've decided to look at this passage because in 11 it talks about the devil being an angel of light, but I want to look at the broader context of that, how this applies to the Christian life, but I'll also share the gospel, how you can be born again. Of course, the gospel is how you live, as not just how you're born again, but we'll look at all of that. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, starting in verse 1, King James. Now I, Paul, myself, beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I beseech you that I may not be bold when I am present with that confidence, wherewith I think to be bold against some which think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringeth into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. Excuse me. Now, what's Paul saying here? Excuse me. Let's try it from the New King James. Now I, Paul, myself, am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent am bold toward you. So when Paul's present among them, I don't know what he means by lowly. Does he mean that he's humble, that he's quiet? I doubt it. I suspect that what he might mean is that they look down on him to some degree, but he has more confidence when he's absent from them, that he can speak freely because he doesn't get interrupted, for example, and so that he can be bold in his letters. And it is easier to be bold in letters than when you're facing someone. Let's just go back to the King James. I'll turn on Strong's numbers, and I want to look at this word that the King James calls base, but the New King James calls lowly. Let's go over to the dictionary, tapenos. Low, not high, particularly of attitude and social positions. It can refer to the condition or lot, meaning humble, poor, of low degree, where it is the opposite of plusius, wealthy or rich. And it can mean of the mind, meaning lowly, humble, or modest, including the idea of affliction or depression of mind, where it means timid, modest, the opposite of tharon, the present participle of thereo, to exercise courage or courageous. So he had fear when he was with them. Maybe Paul's more like Timothy than I imagined. And so while he seems so courageous to others, he was quite willing to persecute the church. Maybe he had more, humility is not quite the right word, because humility is a godly thing. And we're not talking about being godly versus being ungodly. We're talking about, I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about. But the implication is that when he's present with them, he lacks courage. And that he was scared to say what he needed to say. And maybe it's not just courage. Maybe it is more difficult to say hard things to people's faces. I experienced this recently. I invited someone on from India to preach the gospel because they claimed to be a gospel preacher. But when I explained that's not the gospel that you're preaching isn't scriptural, the guy's disappeared on me, and I don't know whether I offended him or not. It is difficult to say things to people's face. People can get offended very easily, whereas you write it in a letter. If they get offended, they just ignore the letter. But you've written it down. You haven't got distracted, or you can get finished what you're saying if you write things down. Let's try also the ESV and see what the Actually, let's finish with the New King James with these verses. But I beg you that when I am present, I may not be bold with that confidence by which I intend to be bold against some who think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. Now, once again, what on earth is he talking? I don't understand what this verse means. But I beg you that when I am present, I may not be bold with that confidence by which I intend to be bold against some who think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. Wow. I think I see the point that he's making. By the time we get down to this verse, it's making more sense to me. But I have no idea by which I intend to be bold against some. So do you mean intention in the sense of how you do operate towards some, or the fleshly intention that you have in being bold against some who think of us? I think this is a poor translation. I don't think that's what he's saying. Let's try this one. I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some. Ah, yes. That makes sense. And it fits the context. I think that's what he's actually saying. I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. Very convoluted, right? Because it's being translated from the Greek, and Paul writes in a difficult Greek in the first place, more difficult than Peter or John write, or most authors. Luke is more technical Greek, but Paul writes in a very precise, logical Greek that you have to tease apart what he's actually saying. Let me see if I can explain what I believe he's saying here. This is what makes sense. I beg of you that when I am present, so when I come to you, please don't still be in this situation that you Corinthians, this problem that you have, that they had even worse in 1 Corinthians, but he's still correcting them. They still have this issue that he has to be bold with the confidence that some see as walking according to the flesh. And I think people misunderstand me in this same way as well. That there are times when you have to rebuke. You have to use strong language. You may even have to call people names because it's accurate and because those people deserve that sort of rebuke. So he says to them, I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. So there's some people who accuse Paul of walking according to the flesh when he's walking in the Spirit. Basically, it's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. They're accusing the work of the Holy Spirit of being fleshly because of the confidence that he has in God's word. Roman Catholics do this about those of us who believe in eternal security, that it's arrogant to say that you can be sure that you're saved. Well, it would be if we were trusting the flesh, but we're not trusting the flesh. It's actually arrogant to reject God's word and say, oh, no, we can't know that we're saved, when God's word says that we do know. I'll be back. I have to do something. Well, thanks, Jamie. I hope I can catch you then. And I noticed in the last one you were sniping from the sidelines again. I'm not sure what the point of that comment was. I know that you don't think like that, but I'm not sure why you made that comment. Anyway, I look forward to having you come back. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. Now, I believe he's saying two things here. First of all, no, I'm not walking in the flesh. You can accuse me of it, but I'm following the Spirit. I know that I'm following the Spirit. I know that I'm walking by faith. I know what God's word says. I know what it's like to walk according to the flesh, Paul is saying here. I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm doing. If I was doing it, I would stop doing it. But there's another point that he's making. Yes, you're right. We shouldn't be walking according to the flesh. And he's reaffirming that truth, that it's wrong to walk in the flesh. Walk according to the flesh, We walk in the flesh in that we are in our bodies, the flesh in that sense of body. But we are not waging war according to the flesh. We as Christians are not here to fight battles with our body. That's not how we advance the gospel. We are actually to lay down our bodies for the service of Christ, not to wage war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but we have divine power to destroy strongholds. The weapons of our warfare are not according to the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. Let's try that in the King James. It says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. That means fleshly, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. I think that's a better translation. I think the King James has translated that verse well as well. I don't know why the New King James messed it up. Ridiculous. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal or fleshly, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Now, I want to check something here. Let's go over to King James Plus. Why do they translate that as flesh, but this as carnal? Because it is a different word. Sarkikos rather than sarx. But surely it's the same word pertaining to the flesh or fleshly. Why change it to carnal rather than fleshly? So that we can see that it's the same word as this one, flesh, fleshly. But mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought in other people's minds. Can you bring into captivity every thought in other people's minds? No. You can present them with the truth, but you can't bring them into captivity. So this is the war that this is talking about is not between people, it's within people. How do we walk? We're waging war within ourselves. We walk in the flesh. We're in this physical body, but we do not wage war after the flesh. That's not how the war is fought. Let's look up this word here. Kata. Down from, down upon, or down in is the idea of kata. So this word that the King James has translated as after. Actually, let me try another thing. Not compare. Yes, compare. Sorry. For although we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. Down from or down in or down after. I don't know why they say according. I assume it means that, but why does the Greek word literally mean down in, down from, or down after? I guess because the flesh is not in charge. That would be the idea, that it's over, above, ruling is the idea. For although we may be living in the flesh, we're not fighting after the way of the flesh. We live in this world, but we don't act like it's people. No, it's not world, it's flesh. That's wrong. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. We live in this world. No, it's not the word world, it's flesh. But we don't fight our battles in the same way the world does. Yeah, but it's not world, it's flesh. ESV we've already done. There's the Greek. Here's the Greek interlinear, which is a terrible Greek interlinear, that one. Of course we are human, but we don't fight like humans. That's better. That's actually quite a good translation for simple English. Of course we're living in the world. No, it's not the word world. But we do not wage war in a world-like way. No, flesh, 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 flesh. In realtà, sebbene viviamo nella carne, non combattiamo secondo la carne. That's Italian for those of you that speak Italian. I hope I did it justice. I'm not a fluent Italian speaker. 3 anni a scuola. I did it for 3 years at school. Parlo poco l'italiano. I speak a little bit of Italian. For although we are living in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. And then the literal translation by Jay Green, I believe his name was, for walking about in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. Or LSV, for walking in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. And we've already done New King. Oh, no, we didn't. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. So that gives you some idea of the many different ways that it might be able to be translated. Let's go back to the King James and the next verse. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Let's actually go to compare again. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, fleshly. Why don't you translate it fleshly? But mighty through God to the overthrowing of strongholds. For the arms with which we are fighting are not those of the flesh, but are strong before God for the destruction of high places. Or fight our battles with the weapons of this world. Instead, we use God's power that can destroy fortresses. We destroy arguments. And yes, they're right to point out that why is it broken up this way? That is a continuing thought. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty by God to the pulling down of strongholds. The weapons we use are not human ones. Our weapons have power from God and can destroy the enemy's strong places. We destroy people's arguments, once again, an incomplete thought. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. For the weapons of our warfare, that's CSV again. Skip over that interlinear. The weapons we use in our fight are not made by humans. Rather, they are powerful weapons from God. With them, we destroy people's defenses. That is, their arguments. Once again, that's a good translation. For the weapons of our warfare are not those of the world. Instead, they have the power of God to demolish fortresses. We tear down arguments. I'm already done the King James. LEB, for the weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but powerful to God for the tearing down of fortresses, tearing down arguments. For the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly. Finally, someone translates it as fleshly, but powerful to God to the demolition of strongholds. And then, of course, the thought goes on in the next verse, tearing down arguments, as some add that to this verse. For the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but powerful to God for bringing down of strongholds. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, fleshly, but mighty in God, through God, from God, to God, according to this one, for pulling down strongholds. Let's go to the next verse. Casting down vain imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ. And I forgot to add the StreamYard link, and give me just a second. I will pin that to the top of the chat. Got to keep remembering to do that. And let me mute myself on that. On the thumbnail, walking in the flesh seemed very different in the two versions. Yeah, sorry, I can't see the the thumbnail. I don't really care about the thumbnail. Right, let's get back to studying these verses. Putting an end to reasonings. Now, here I want to go through each of these one at a time. Let's go through every one of these translations, and let's read it from the beginning. Now I, Paul, am personally exhorting you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. On the one hand, when present with you, I am base, humble, timid. But on the other hand, when absent, I am bold towards you. But I am beseeching you so that when I am present, I may not have to be bold with the confidence with which I intend to show boldness towards some who think that we are walking according to the flesh. For although we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the overthrowing of strongholds, casting down vain imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ. and having a readiness to avenge all disobedience when your obedience has been fulfilled. Okay, let's read that in the next one. BBE, I'm not particularly happy with this translation, but it might be useful to see what they have to say. We will see. Now, I, Paul, make myself make request to you by the quiet and gentle behavior of Christ, who am poor in spirit when with you, but who say what is in my mind to you without fear when I am away from you. I think that's not a bad understanding of it. Yes, I make my request to you so that when I am with you, I may not have to make use of the authority which may be needed against some to whom we seem to be walking after the flesh. I think there's two things going on here, that they're choosing one or the other, but we need to see it as both. So there are people that think that Paul walks after the flesh, and so therefore he has to operate in a more strenuous way, in a more confidently bold way. But I also think that it's saying, so it's a vicious cycle. Because he has to operate in that confidently bold way, people go, oh, you're walking after the flesh. I think both things are happening. And I think we need to understand that. And that's why there's confusion in the translations, because both things are happening, and some of the translations are translating it to mean that one thing. And because in English, we can't have it mean both. We have to say one or the other, or we have to add both understandings in. But I do think the Greek is meaning both. For though we may be living in the flesh, we are not fighting after the way of the flesh. For the arms with which we are fighting are not those of the flesh, but are strong before God for the destruction of high places. I'm not sure why that is in italics and grayed out, as though it's not actually supposed to be there. Maybe they think there's dispute over that verse, but I don't think there is. Putting an end to reasonings and every high thing which is lifted up against the knowledge of God, and causing every thought to come under the authority of Christ, being ready to give punishment to whatever is against his authority, after you have made it clear that you are completely under his control. Let's try the CEV. Do you think I am a coward when I am with you, and brave when I am far away? Well, I ask you to listen, because Christ himself was humble and gentle. This is a different approach. So it's not saying that he is lacking in confidence when he's with them. That's how they think he is. Some people have said that we act like the people of this world. So when I arrive, I expect I will have to be firm and forceful in what I say to them. Please don't make me treat you that way. I think that's a good understanding of what he's trying to say to them, or at least one of the things he's trying to say. We live in this world, but we don't act like its people or fight our battles with the weapons of this world. Instead, we use God's power that can destroy fortresses. We destroy arguments and every bit of pride that keeps anyone from knowing God. Notice how some people start the next verse here, and some people start it there. We destroy arguments and every bit of pride that keeps anyone from knowing God. We capture people's thoughts and to make them obey Christ. No. No, we capture our own thoughts. Whether other people's thoughts are captured or not depends on whether they submit to Christ. And then their thoughts can be captured. We can't make them obey Christ. No. And when you completely obey him, we will punish anyone who refuses to obey. Ooh. No, I don't think that's what that's saying, but we'll get back to that verse. Let's try EMTV. Now I, Paul, myself appeal to you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who face to face am lowly among you, but when I am away am bold toward you. But I beseech you that when I am present I may not be bold with the confidence with which I plan to be bold towards some who consider us as walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty by God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to avenge every act of disobedience whenever your obedience is fulfilled. ERV, I, Paul, am begging you with the gentleness and the kindness of Christ. Some say that I am bold when I am writing you from a distance, but not when I am there with you. That's an interesting approach, and maybe that's the correct understanding. They think our motives for what we do are like those of the world. I plan to be very bold against those people when I come. I hope I will not need to use that same boldness with you. I think they've managed with this one to include both ideas. Well done. We live in this world, but we don't fight our battles in the same way the world does. And then they go and throw it all away by translating it as world instead of flesh. The weapons we use are not human ones. You could at least say human. That's actually not a bad translation. Human outside of Christ, fallen humans, children of Adam. Our weapons have power from God and can destroy the enemy's strong places. We destroy people's arguments, and we tear down every proud idea that raises itself against the knowledge of God. We also capture every thought and make it give up and obey Christ. We are ready to punish anyone there who does not obey, but first we want you to be fully obedient. That might be a good translation. ESV. I, Paul, myself entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away. I beg you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Let's skip all of those and go to GW. I, Paul, make my appeal to you with the gentleness and kindness of Christ. I'm the one who is humble when I'm with you, but forceful toward you when I'm not with you. So there's two ways that they're understanding that it's Paul saying that's true, but then other translators are saying, well, it's the perception that people have that he's humble or meek or timid when he's with them, lowly. It's not necessarily what we would understand as humble, but forceful or bold or confident when he's not with them. So his letters have great power, but in presence he's weak. And he says this in other places as well. Is he saying that is true, that that's how he operates, that he changes his behavior? Or is he saying that's just how it appears to people? I suspect the latter. I beg you that when I am with you, I won't have to deal forcefully with you. I expect I will have to, because some people think that we are only goaded by human motives. Excellent. That's another excellent understanding of that verse, it seems to me. Of course we are human, but we don't fight like humans. The weapons we use in our fight are not made by humans. Rather, they are powerful weapons from God. With them, we destroy people's defenses, that is, their arguments, and all their intellectual arrogance that opposes that's bad English. And all their intellectual arrogance, that's singular, so opposes has to be singular. Oppose is used with a plural noun. I think they've made a mistake there. And all their intellectual arrogance, and I would rather say that opposes whatever, the knowledge of God. We take every thought captive so that it is obedient to Christ. We are ready to punish every act of disobedience when you have become completely obedient. See, I don't understand that translation, and maybe that is what the Greek's saying, but I don't understand it. How can there be any disobedience to be punished if everybody's become completely obedient? What disobedience? And Paul doesn't punish disobedience. What does he mean by we? Is this talking about church discipline? But it doesn't mean when he's I like that other translation that says he's encouraging them to become obedient. And then when he turns up, which is what he's really talking about, I will turn up there and sort things out, because you're not sorting them out. He wants them to sort it out. Otherwise, there will be discipline. But what does he mean by we? Does he mean himself? Does he mean the Holy Spirit? Does he mean the church? Well, to one degree, I'd say all three. Let's try ISV. Now, I myself, Paul, plead with you with the gentleness and kindness of Christ. I do not understand why this translation translates it as the Messiah. It's not the Messiah. It's Christos. And Christos is Christ. Why do they go to the Hebrew all of a sudden? I who am humble when I am face to face with you, but forceful toward you when I am away. I beg you that when I come, I will not need to be courageous by daring to oppose some people who think that we are living according to the flesh. So they didn't spend a lot of effort in bringing out the real meaning of that verse, it seems to me. Of course, we are living in the world. No, not the world. But we do not wage war in a world like fleshly, is the literal translation. Sorry, people. For the weapons of our warfare are not those of the flesh. Instead, we have the power of God to demolish fortresses. We tear down arguments and every proud obstacle that is raised against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive in order to obey Christ. Once your obedience is complete, we will be ready to reprimand every type of disobedience. Okay. See, I still don't understand what that means. If that's what it should be translated as. Let's go to LEB. Now I, Paul, appeal to you myself by the humility and gentleness of Christ, who when I am present in person am humble among you, but when I am absent am bold toward you. Now I ask when I am present that I will not need to be bold with the confidence with which I propose to show boldness towards some who consider us as behaving according to the flesh. As other translations have said, please don't make me behave in that way. I don't want to have to rebuke you. I don't want to have to come down on you like a ton of bricks, to use that phrase. For although we are living in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but powerful to God for the tearing down of fortresses, tearing down arguments and all pride that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And we are ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is completed. Literal, and I myself, Paul, call on you through the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who indeed to look upon am lowly among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I ask, not being present, that I may be bold with the confidence with which I think to be daring against some, the ones reckoning us as walking according to the flesh. And although that may be a little awkward, I think that does say the same thing that I think the Greek is saying. He hasn't tried to change the Greek to say something different or to confuse the issue even further than is necessary to get it from Greek into English. For walking about in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but powerful to God to the demolition of, he spelt demolition wrong. It's added an SH. It's just an S, of strongholds, the demolishing, that does have an SH, of arguments and every high thing lifting up itself. You don't need the itself. Lifting up against the knowledge of God and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ. And having readiness to avenge all disobedience whenever your obedience is fulfilled. Notice that that's literal. I still don't understand what it means, but that's the literal. Some people have already assumed a meaning to readiness that I don't think, it just doesn't make sense, what I've been reading of the translations of this. They either go with this, which doesn't tell us much. I don't understand it. I need to dig into the Greek. Or they assume a meaning that you go, well, that doesn't make sense. And I, Paul, myself, call on you through the meekness and gentleness of the Christ, who in presence indeed humble among you, and being absent have courage toward you. And I implore that being present I may not have courage with the confidence with which I reckon to be bold against certain, reckoning us as walking according to the flesh. For walking in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare, not fleshly, but powerful to God, for bringing down of strongholds, bringing down reasonings and every high thing lifted up against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and being in readiness to avenge every disobedience whenever your obedience might be fulfilled. Okay. New King James. Let's see what it says. Now I, Paul, myself, am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I beg you that when I am present, I may not be bold with that confidence by which I intend to be bold against some who think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to punish or avenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. Still have no idea what that verse means, and I've gone through all of them, so let's try the commentaries on this verse and see if, firstly, Vincent's word studies can help us. Let's try that one. To avenge all disobedience, etc. The military metaphor continued. Oh, continued, so we have to go back to the previous verse. Casting down, not the weapons, but we war casting down. High thing, only here, and Romans 8:39, falling in with the metaphor of strongholds, high military works thrown up, or lofty natural fastnesses with the battlements of rock. The word is also used in the Septuagint and Apocrypha of mental revelation, as Job 24:24, where the Septuagint reads, his haughtiness hath harmed many. So it's referring to pride. High thing. So the philosophies of this world. Remember, he's writing to Corinth, Greeks who greatly value philosophy and wisdom of men. Remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where he destroys that, and he says, no, God isn't interested in human wisdom. He has his own wisdom. And the wisdom of God seems like foolishness to this world. Exalteth itself, or in the Revised is exalted. Aeschylus uses a similar metaphor in Atos's dream of the two women whom Xerxes yoked to his chariot, and the one towered loftily in these trappings. So this is not hard to understand. A high thing is exalted. It's up there. And people who lift themselves up as being more wise, like Calvinists do. In fact, I was mentioning earlier this given announcement. There are 40 plus viewers. What? My friend is doing a scheduled presentation. If you join and do an after show, it could get more viewers as FST's channel. Flash worldly. Context taps. I take those words as potentially meaning worldly and not of Christ. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. So you're trying to encourage me to shut down and go over to another channel in the hopes that I attract viewers. Well, Jamie, feel free to go over there. Isn't that Standing for Truth channel anyway? Jamie, if you want to go over to that channel, go for it. And encourage people to come over to this channel when they're finished. Right, well, let's keep studying this. Bringing into captivity or leading away captive. The military metaphor is continued. The leading away of the captives after the storming of the stronghold. See on captives in that verse his opinion. The campaign against the Cilician, Cilician pirates, Cilician pirates resulted in the reduction of 120 strongholds and the capture of more than 10,000 prisoners. And then on thought, Noema. See 2 Corinthians with their minds. I think we understand thought to the obedience of Christ. In pursuance of the metaphor, the obedience is the new stronghold into which the captives are led. This is indicated by the preposition ice, into or unto. Sure. So then, going back to the verse we were in, to avenge all disobedience, the military metaphor continued. After most have surrendered and thus fulfilled their obedience, some rebels may remain, and these will be punished. Well, that doesn't help one tiny little bit. Why does Paul say we will punish all disobedience? Does we mean Paul? Is Paul going to go around punishing the disobedient? Thanks. After all of that, you didn't add any new information that helped me whatsoever. Let's try Robertson's word pictures. Being in readiness, this very idiom occurs in Polybius and Philo, holding in readiness, and so forth. So being ready. I don't think that's a difficult concept. Disobedience, rare word, Plato, Papyri, hearing amiss, aside, failing to hear, refusing to heed. So I think disobedience is a good translation. I don't think there's any confusion there. When your obedience, so he doesn't deal with ready to avenge all disobedience when your obedience has been fulfilled. Indefinite temporal clause with hotan and first aorist passive subjunctive. Paul expects that the whole church will become obedient to Christ's will soon as came true. What? Paul expects that the whole church will become obedient to Christ's will soon as came true. That doesn't even make sense. I have no idea what he's trying to say there. Let's try another one. Wow, these are really useless. Typical. Let's try Barnes. Albert Barnes. And having a readiness, I am ready to punish all disobedience, notwithstanding all that is said to the contrary. See the notes. Right. So this is going back to verses 1 and 2. So if he does appear there, he is ready to be bold if he has to be. Clothed as I am with this power, aiming to subdue all things to Christ, though the weapons of my warfare are not carnal, and though I am modest or timid, when I am with you, I am prepared to take any measures of severity required by my apostolic office, even though he says we, in order that I may inflict deserved punishment on those who have violated the laws of Christ. The design of this is to meet the objection of his enemies, and that he would not dare to execute his threatenings when your obedience is fulfilled. Doddridge renders this, now your obedience is fulfilled and the sounder part of your church restored to due order and submission. Yes, that's my understanding as well. He's trying to get the Corinthians back in line, and once at least some of them are back in obedience, then the rest who don't want to be obedient can be punished. That makes sense. The idea seems to be that Paul was ready to inflict discipline when the church had showed a readiness to obey his laws. Well, let's not say his laws, God's laws, Christ's laws. That's what he's saying. And to do its own duty, delicately intimating that the reason why it was not done was the lack of entire promptness in the church itself. Otherwise, he'd have to punish the whole church. And that means no church would be left. No, the way that we discipline is kick people out of the church. And so there needs to be a church remaining to be able to discipline. If everybody's disobedience, then you're kicking everybody out of the church and the church ceases to exist. So if a church is in disobedience, there's not a lot you can do to fix it. You have to get on the inside, and there has to be at least one person. And I believe that's the point that Jesus is making in Revelation 3:20. He's talking to a church, not talking to individuals who are not saved. He's talking to Christians and saying, get right with me. Get back into fellowship with me. Stop walking in the flesh. And then I can fellowship with you. I will come into him and I will sup with him and he with me. But they were walking in disobedience, the Laodicean church, much like the Corinthian church. And church discipline can't occur unless there's at least, well, really church discipline can't occur unless there's two. There needs to be at least two. It can't be one on his own. One person isn't a church. And that it could not be done on any offender as long as the church itself was not prepared to sustain him. Exactly. The church was to discountenance the enemies of the Redeemer, to show an entire readiness to sustain the apostle and to unite with him in the effort to maintain the discipline of God's house. Finally, someone that seems to make some sense of the passage. Here's Clark's comment. I am ready, through the mighty armor of God, to punish those opposers of the doctrine of Christ and the disobedience which has been produced by them. Now, remember, this is Paul. We operate under a slightly different authority. We don't have apostolic authority. We have to submit to apostolic authority. We have to submit to the scriptures, whereas Paul had authority directly from Christ. We don't have that same ability. We have to walk more humbly than Paul did even. When your disobedience is fulfilled, when you have in the fullest manner discountenanced, once again, using this word discountenanced, separate, let's go to the dictionary and look up what discountenanced means. Hey, g'day, Trav. What do you mean happy birthday? What's that supposed to mean? Happy birthday to WA, you mean? Not my happy birthday. I'm a Queenslander. My happy birthday. Actually, when is Queensland Day? Even though they don't have a holiday for it for some reason. Queensland Day. I think it's around about this same time. 6th of June. Yep, 6th of June is Queensland Day, but we don't celebrate it as a holiday because we're not as lazy as West Australians. I'm kidding. I don't think of West Australians as lazy. I'm just stirring. Now, what was I going to look up? Discountenanced. Discountenanced. Countenance refers to the face. To discountenance means to rip someone's face off. No. To view or treat with disfavor, to put out of countenance, to disconcert. It means to separate from them so you can't see their face, would be my understanding of that word. To disfavor or disapprove of. Excellent. That is an excellent understanding of the word. And it's a good word to use, except we don't use it anymore. So disfellowship would be a good Christian word to use here. When you have in the fullest manner disfellowshipped those men and separated yourselves from their communion. There you go. He does explain it. Separated yourselves from their communion. The apostle was not in haste to pull up the tares, lest he should pull up the wheat also. Oh, I hate how people do that. That's got nothing to do with it. That's the parable of the tares and the wheat. It's talking about the world, not the church. No, you're wrong. Can I put a line through that? Can I cross that out? Oh, actually, I know what I can do. I can put a dark grey on it because it's nonsense. All the terms in these two verses are military. Allusion is made to a strongly fortified city where the enemy had made his last stand, entrenching himself about the walls, strengthening all his redoubts and ramparts. We don't use this word redoubts anymore, but if you're into military history and castles and so forth, raising castles, towers, and various engines of defense and offense upon the walls, and neglecting nothing that might tend to render his stronghold impregnable. The army of God comes against the place and attacks it. The strongholds, all the fortified places, are carried. The imaginations, engines, and whatever the imagination or skill of man could raise, are speedily taken and destroyed. Every high thing, all the castles and towers, are sapped, thrown down, and demolished. The walls are battered into breaches, and the besieging army, carrying everything at the point of the sword, enter the city, storm, and take the citadel. Everywhere defeated, the conquered submit and are brought into captivity. Everywhere that is defeated, he means, in modern English, are led away captives, and thus the whole government it is destroyed. So the human being against whom God's army makes an assault. This is why it's so important for us to be able to answer the objections of those who are not submitted to God. We must be able to destroy their arguments. And if we can't, we need to do more study until we can. Whatever arguments they have, destroy them with truth. It is easy to apply these things as far as may be consistent with the apostles' design. The general sense I have given in the preceding notes. Very good, except for one small failure. I think I've got a good enough sense of it. So he's talking about the church as a whole, and we can apply it that way. That's a good way to understand this. Oh, sorry, I got hiccups. Oh, dear me. Well, no one's listening to me, so I'm just going to be silent for a little while while I do something else. Dearie me. It really saddens me that all people want is arguments. They just want nastiness, and people don't appear to be interested in studying God's word. I feel like I'm on my own frequently. Let's see if I get a response this time when I make the comment. Is anybody listening? Is anybody out there? Hello, hello. It says that one person's watching. Is that just me? Or is there someone else? Okay. A little more patience, Graham. Just a little more patience. Is anyone listening? Hello, please make a comment. One of the things that I hate about other people's streams is that they ignore the chat. Someone gets on and waffles and waffles and waffles, and the chat heads in a completely different direction, and people's questions don't get answered, and the trolls dominate the chat with all of their lies, and the lies don't get answered. Absolutely moronic. And here I am on my channel. I pay very close attention to the chat, but people, I don't know, very few people come on my channel. I'm going to go do something else for a while. This is making me angry. See yous.